Greetings, students, and welcome to another installment of Classical Mythology. Today we will be discussing, in this video, the third play of Aeschylus's Oresteia, which is called the Eumenides. And in this video, we're going to talk about a couple of essential aspects of the play. We'll be talking about divination, prophecy, and dream, continuing some of our discussions from the previous lecture videos and the chat forum on Slack. We'll be looking at what these modes of communication with the divine contribute to the meaning and meanings of the play. We'll be looking at the figure of the Pythia rather briefly. She is the first speaker in the Eumenides, and she is at her temple, which is the Temple of Apollo, when the play begins, and she is the one who first reacts to the Furies in this play. We'll also be talking a little bit about Apollo as an Olympian god associated with the arts of prophecy. In the opening prologue of the Pythia, she begins by talking about prophecy and its history. She begins by talking about how Earth was the original prophetic force and the ways in which prophecy as the divine rite and ritual and experience has been transmitted through to different gods. And one of the things that's really interesting to notice about that is that prophecy is a majority feminine experience until Apollo gains control or gains access to this divine power. So all of the Pythia's discussion of previous prophetic powers are dominated by female figures, and here Apollo is a male figure interceding in a feminine tradition. So we'll be pondering Apollo as the Olympian god associated with prophecy. We'll be pondering the sort of history of prophecy and what Apollo's relationship to that concept is. And then we're introducing as well the divine and monstrous Furies, which are also called the Eumenides. And in the beginning of in the introduction to the text that you read in preparation for watching this video and commenting, Sarah Rudin, our translator, talks through the different names of the Furies. So the Eumenides is the original Greek name. Erinus is the singular version. And the Latinized version gives us the word Furies in English. The Furies are also, by the end of the play, kindly ones. Hence the play's title, Eumenides. However, they're never actually called Eumenides in the play. They're called Semnae Theai by Athena, and Semnae Theai means like sort of blessed goddesses. So they do have a lot of different names, and their names are changing throughout the play. And that's something we'll ponder, because we'll be thinking about, does the nature of the Furies change throughout the play? Is there a kind of fundamental taming or domestication of the Furies that occurs by the end of the Eumenides? In the next video, we will talk about the Furies' connection to sleep and dream, and the sort of what I'm calling the sleep side, to borrow a phrase from Anne Carson, the classicist translator poet whose Bacchae translation we read earlier this semester. And then in the next video, there will be some discussion questions. There are also some discussion questions on this video as well. So we're starting with just like a loose introduction to the themes of divination and prophecy. And what you see here is the the oracular space and site at Delphi, a modern picture of the ruins of Delphi, what it looks like today. And we're going to ask, how did the Greeks relate to their oracles? This is a question that has been coming up throughout the Oresteia. And I want you to think about other examples we've seen of oracular interpretation this semester. What other instances of oracular communication and interpretation have caused interest or problems in the narratives we've looked at thus far this semester? We're also going to think about the ambiguity of oracles and the necessity of interpretation. So oracles we can see as a form of communication from divinity to humanity. But it's a form of communication that is in no way straightforward and requires interpretation. And this is explained or contextualized by Daniel Ogden, who is a scholar of ancient religion. He says this is to bridge the gap between the assumption of divine infallibility and the ostensible errors made, so accounting for the ambiguity of oracles in terms of the fact that the gods are supposed to be infallible, and there are often human relationships to oracles that do not turn out the way that people expected them to. So this ambiguity within oracles themselves allows for the gods to stay infallible and errors of interpretations to still occur. So how to know, this is a question posed by many of the texts that we've read, how to know when we can trust an oracle's divine credibility. Oracular practices were also paid practices. So there is a question of whose interests are at stake in the interpretation of an oracle, and how can this process of interpretation be corrupted? And how can we know when an oracle can individually be trusted and be interpreted in a particular way? So there are two general forms of divination that I wanted to introduce today. And this is a sort of binary of divination that's not totally absolute, but one that can be helpful. The first kind of divination is called inductive, meaning it's induced from events. So the role of the mantis, or the seer, someone like Tiresias, would be to read the gods' messages from a variety of events or manifestations, such as portents. So think of examples of portents we've seen. We saw a lot in the Iliad recently. Things like, an eagle, beating up a hare in the sky. Astrological events could also be interpreted by a mantis. Birds. So augury is a practice that is associated with divination. The interpreting of patterns of birds in flight can give us some access to the gods' messages. And then also human symptoms like seizures could be interpreted as divine interventions in the human body. We also have seers gaining or inducing oracular meaning from the innards of sacrificed animals, and looking at the arrangement and some of the features of those innards in order to interpret what those innards are telling us or telling the human beings from the gods. The other mode of divination that we see is called inspired, where a god speaks to or through a person. And this can take place in the form of dreams, as we've seen in the case of Clytemnestra's dream in the Libation Bearers, which was discussed extensively in our other lecture video for this week. And dreams in Greek religion could be spontaneous, like Clytemnestra's was. It wasn't something she was out there seeking. But sometimes a dreamer or an individual person will seek a dream, will seek to be inspired or have an individual message sent to them through the dreamscape from a god. Other examples of inspired divination occur at sanctuaries that housed prophets. And so the most relevant sanctuary for our purposes today is Delphi, which again is represented in the image on the left. Some of the pillars of the temple remain. And Delphi, where we have the sanctuary to Apollo, was the place that housed the Pythian oracle, who is again the character who opens the Eumenides. And we could do a whole extra lesson on the Pythian oracle, which we won't do today. But know that there are a lot of different accounts of how the Pythian oracle worked in relation to Apollo, and how she was an inspired conduit for Apollo's voice to humanity. So what is Apollo's relationship to divination? Apollo gains the sort of divine aspect of covering the communications between God and man in terms of prophecy, oracle, and things of that nature. Apollo's epithets that you may or may not have noticed thus far that aren't to do with his arrows and things like that are Apollo Pythios, or sometimes Pythian Apollo, The root puth means to question, but also he's called this because of his association with the python. We saw Apollo fight off the python in Book 1 of Ovid's Metamorphoses, and then establish his Pythian games as a ritual reminder and celebration of his conquest over the python. And we also see him called Apollo Nomios. Nomos can mean law and melody or tune. Apollo is also associated with a range of prophetesses. We've seen him associated with the Sibyl, the Delphic oracle, the Pythia. We've also seen him associated with Cassandra, importantly in this trilogy. And the Pythia is an interesting sort of mirroring of Cassandra, because at the end of the first play of the trilogy, the Agamemnon, Cassandra, who is a reluctant and disbelieved oracle of Apollo, is watching and beholding and seeing in prophetic vision some of the history and the trauma of the house that the chorus can't see. And then at the beginning of the final play of the trilogy, the Eumenides, the Pythia, also an Apolline priestess, is horrified by her vision of the Furies. And the Pythia and Cassandra are seeing some different things, but they're both seeing the Furies in a way that mediates the audience's response to them. So we do see the Furies through the eyes not only of Apollo, but through his priestesses, first Cassandra and later the Pythia. And the Pythia, in her name, you can obviously see her connection to Apollo. As I've mentioned before, Delphi was a site and sanctuary that was holy to Apollo, and this is where the Delphic oracle was situated. And Apollo, as we've discussed before in our considerations of his relationship with Dionysus, we've talked about their complementarity and their sort of aesthetic energies as constituting, according to Friedrich Nietzsche, the essence of tragedy and the energies and sort of aesthetic drives of tragedy. And we associated via Nietzsche Dionysus with the percussive, chaotic elements, and Apollo with the orderly, lyrical, shiny and bright elements. So here's a passage, I'm quoting Walter Otto from 1954, writing about Apollo. And this is what he says. The chaotic must take shape. The turbulent must be reduced to time and measure. Opposites must be wedded in harmony. This music is thus the great educator, the sources and symbol of all order in the world and in the life of mankind. Apollo, the musician, is identical with the founder of ordinances, identical with him who knows what is right, what is necessary, what is to be. And this is certainly Apollo's role in the Eumenides, although he is not centered as a musician here. Instead, the major singers in the Eumenides are the Furies. So the opposite kind of music then that's which is associated with Apollo. They constantly emphasize that their music does not have a lyre. It's a tune without a lyre. And Apollo's key instrument, as represented in the image here, is that lyre, which you can see has a tortoise shell component of it. So Apollo is associated with the aestheticization and musicalization and turning a chaos into order. And so if we think about his musical energy as sort of influencing let's say as opposed to the chaotic musical energy of the Furies in the Eumenides, the fact that their voices transform by the end of the play kind of demonstrates Apollo's rulership over them, because their voices transform from binding songs and curses, songs that are supposed to drive Orestes out of his mind, songs that don't have a lyre. And then by the end of the play, they are singing prayers of exaltation in support of Athenian well-being. So their vocal transformation, we might also see within the context of Apollo's distribution of order, Apollo as the god who knows what is right, who founds ordinances. we may not personally agree with the logic that Apollo posits in the third play of the Oresteia. I know that students have universally, in my teaching of this play, been horrified by the way that Apollo and Athena reason that the paternal parent is more important than the maternal. Okay.